Hey, so I'm here on the set of my new short film that I'm working on, and the reason I'm recording here is because I live here. I live on set because I'm in quarantine. That sounds really stylish. But the reason that I'm recording this video today is because it's Thanksgiving. Well, if you're a patron, it's the week before Thanksgiving, but you know, same thing. And on Thanksgiving every year, I like to celebrate Franksgiving. I like to watch Frankenstein movies because Frankenstein movies are fun. Um, Apart from the creature from the Black Lagoon, I think Frankenstein is my favorite monster, my favorite Universal monster. And I don't know, maybe I have something for green monsters that lumber around and abduct women. Um, Although with Frankenstein's monster, it tends to be little girls, which might be a little weird. I don't know. I'm getting off topic. Anyways, so what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be reviewing the first four Universal Frankenstein films. That's Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein, and Ghost of Frankenstein. Ooh. And I'm not going to be covering Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, House of Dracula, House of Frankenstein, because I feel like those are more crossover movies than Frankenstein movies. They are included on this Blu-ray set, but so is Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, and I really don't think you guys would like to see me review a comedy. Yeah, just the first four Frankenstein movies, ranging from 1931 to 1942. And I'm just going to be reviewing each one, and at the end, I'll give you my ranking. Also, I know I'm holding a lapel mic, like a game show host would hold one of those big shotgun mics. The reason for that is that I wanted to hold something the entire time I was making the video, but I didn't want to hold my Yeti microphone the whole time, because it's heavy. Okay, Frankenstein from 1931. It's the one that started it all. It came just a few months after. It came out within a year, I'll say that. I'm not sure on the timeline. It came out within a year of Dracula, of 1931's Dracula. So it was paving the way for all of the films that would follow. And this is a really basic movie. Frankenstein 1931, very basic adaptation, skims over a lot of the book. It just basically has the idea of Frankenstein creates a monster. That's the antithesis. Let's not use words that I don't know how to pronounce, alright? Okay. Yeah, this is a really basic movie, short runtime. It's Colin Clive, it's Dwight Fry. They're making the monster, the classic Boris Karloff monster, Jack Pierce makeup. It's thrilling. It's a little like, there's not much to it. I guess one of my main complaints with the film is that not a lot happens in it. The monster is made. He's tortured by I was gonna say Renfield, but really Fritz. He's tortured by Fritz. He escapes, accidentally drowns a little girl, and then the windmills burn down. And that's the entire movie. You would expect a little bit more from one of the most groundbreaking movies of all time. But you have to remember this was 1931. People were they were terrified. They were having nightmares of this movie, which I can't imagine. Now they're like action movies basically these days. But the visuals in this movie are fantastic. I love the gorgeous, black and white, the painted skies. Everything looks really, really good. Of course, the makeup on the monster is flawless. It helps that I'm watching it on Blu-ray with a restoration. I think if I was watching this on VHS, I wouldn't really care about the visuals. But I don't know. I had a good time watching Running Man on VHS tape. That didn't really hamper me any, so whatever. What am I saying? Frankenstein. Colin Clive plays Dr. Frankenstein. He's pretty good. I mean, he has a few standout scenes. I like the scene where he's just created the monster. Of course, there's the famous, it's alive, it's alive. Now I know what it feels like to truly be God, or some variation of that line. That's a really good scene. I like him when he's manic. But for the rest of the movie, he's kind of overshadowed by the mania of Dwight Fry and like the cool, chilling, commanding presence of Boris Karloff as the monster. He's just he is you know? It's just like, Boris Karloff, the monster. I am terrible at reviewing movies. As far as some of the weaker performances go, I won't call them weak. I'll say that they're underwhelming. Edward Van Sloan plays a doctor like he does in every Universal movie. You'll see he played Dr. Muller in The Mummy. He played Dr. Van Helsing in Dracula, and he played Dr. Waldman in Frankenstein. And I definitely think that Dr. Waldman in Frankenstein is his most underwhelming role. He does nothing. They totally underutilized Edward Van Sloan. His most memorable part is when he comes out at the beginning and warns you that the movie is about to be unsettling and it will give you nightmares, which is kind of cheesy by today's standards, but I like it. I think it adds a little something, a little historicity. That's a word, I'm sure. A little historicity to the movie, you know what I'm saying? Of course, you can't talk about this movie without talking about probably the most famous scene from it, other than the creation scene maybe, and that's the little girl in Frankenstein by the pond. Heartbreaking, but heartwarming. You know, it really plays with your emotions. That's essentially the beginning of the end for the Frankenstein monster. Sets in motion the climax. Now the dad of the drowned girl is pissed. He's gonna kill Frankenstein, and Frankenstein's monster, whoever did this to his little girl, is gonna pay. And you believe his side, and you understand his side. But you also know that Frankenstein's monster had the mind of a child, and he thought that she would float like one of the flowers. He had no idea. He was literally born a few days ago. I don't want to say yesterday, because I don't know what the timeline of Frankenstein is like. You can't really blame him, because Frankenstein's monster is literally a child. But you understand both sides. You know where it's going. You have these two immovable forces coming together, and you know that crap is going to go down. So then you have the windmill scene. Really, really spectacular for 1931. I mean, think about the biggest set piece in Nosferatu. What's the biggest set piece in Nosferatu? Nosferatu on the top of the ship. You see that shot of him walking by? That's like the biggest set piece in Nosferatu. And this, you have a burning windmill and like dummies being dropped off it. It's awesome. Of course, realistically, both the monster and Frankenstein should be dead after that. But, the Universal movie, they have to show that Frankenstein is A-okay. He is recovering in bed, where we will pick up with him in Bride of Frankenstein. And the monster, as we know, is also not dead. He fell into a watery chasm that was underneath the windmill. What? Despite all my little nitpicks about the movie, it's a great start to a franchise. You can definitely tell how studio executives were like, we have some gold on our hands. So I think it's a great franchise starter. Great movie for 1931. Great movie in general, but it's not going to blow your mind if you watch it today expecting like, oh, this is Frankenstein, the definitive version of Frankenstein. In fact, if I'm talking to a friend who's my age and they ask me, what Frankenstein movie should I watch? You know, I've never seen a Frankenstein movie. I'd either recommend to them something like The Curse of Frankenstein, the Hammer movie, because I think that's a little bit more accessible by today's standards, because it's not in black and white, for one, and it's got recognizable actors that they would know from, like, Star Wars. So I would recommend that, or, you know, even something new that's, like, not a great movie, but it'll capture their interest, like, Victor Frankenstein, or whatever that was called. But that's entry level. Like, if you're a fan of horror, obviously this is gonna blow you away. I'd call this movie an 8.5 to a 9 out of 10. Really good, really simple movie. Amazing creature effects though, some really good acting, and it's just a very good cohesive story, a good adaptation, and a great second, like, sophomore effort from Universal. All right, then you have Bride of Frankenstein from 1935. This is the best one. I'm just going to go ahead and say this is the best one. Bride of Frankenstein somehow feels more sophisticated, I think. Like, all the acting feels a little bit better. Camera work feels a little bit better. The quality of the film just feels a little bit better. It's more like a film, you know, than a movie, which I hate. I hate that. That terminology, but, you know, you gotta live with it. It really does communicate the idea you're trying to get across. Yeah, the acting feels just like it's a step above the last movie, even from the returning characters. Like Colin Clive even though he doesn't do much in this movie, which I'll get to later, it feels like he's more into the role than he was last time. But yeah, everybody's really good. I like Dr. Pretorius. He's interesting. Is that his name, Dr. Pretorius? You know what I mean. The guy with the little miniature people. That's cool. That's like a Harryhausen effect. Before Harryhausen was into special effects. I mean, this is 1935. Very impressive is what I'm saying. Very impressive. Not really sure how well it fits in this movie, into the lore of the movie. These little people, especially because it opens up, and this is actually a thing I like. The movie opens up with Mary Shelley continuing her story, Frankenstein, continuing it in the book Frankenstein. The bride was in the book. And the movie was based on the first book, but didn't include the bride. So it's less like a sequel and more like a continuation of the last movie to include more of the book. And I think that's where this movie really achieves more. It shoots higher and it achieves more than the previous film, because it includes more from the book than the first movie did, or more individual elements, I should say. And it does them really well. When I was listening to the audiobook of Frankenstein, I could see the scenes, and they looked exactly like how they did in Bride of Frankenstein. They were really good at adapting the scenes. What was I trying to get to here? What was my original point? Oh, yeah. Oh. No, I got it. Man, I wish my attention span was longer. Oh. Dr. Pretorius' tiny people. Not really sure how that fits into the lore, considering that this is supposedly written by Mary Shelley. Even though Mary Shelley never wrote about this, I'm pretty sure. I don't remember that from the book. Maybe it was in there. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. But yeah, so some really cool effects. I think that the monster looks better this time around. Like, it's just more monster. You know what I'm saying? I don't. Also, another thing to point out, the Bride of Frankenstein, who is more like the bride of the monster, right? Anyway, she's played by the same actor that plays Mary Shelley in the beginning, which I thought was a cool touch. The Bride of Frankenstein herself doesn't do much. She kind of just screams, but she looks really cool. It's a cool design. If I were to gripe, I would say I wish that the bride would have done more, though, as I recall, in the book, she didn't do much in the book either. And she didn't do much in that Kenneth Branagh adaptation, which was really weird. That movie was odd. But as I recall, the bride doesn't do much in the book either. So maybe that was a smart choice for them to adapt it that way. I just think it would have been a good change to make the bride do a little bit more, maybe be a little bit more of a horror villain rather than just a set piece. But I would say the most standout feature of this movie as compared to the previous one is the writing, which I feel like has taken a huge step up. The writing is a lot more... It's a lot more addictive. I don't even know if that's the right word to use, but it feels not more realistic, but more stylistic, if that makes any sense. Whereas in the first movie, dialogue was a way to deliver plot and exposition. Here, it's more a way to illustrate, like, the ethics of what Frankenstein and his colleagues are doing, which I find really cool. It's good writing, basically. For a Universal movie, it's pretty mind-blowing. So overall, I'd call this my favorite in the series. I'm just going to go ahead and spoil that. Bride of Frankenstein is my favorite. It has some flaws, but I think it includes the most things from the series that I like. There are things I like from every movie, even Ghost of Frankenstein, but Bride of Frankenstein has the most, and it does them the best. So I'd probably give this a 9.25 out of 10, or a 9 and a fourth out of 10. It has some flaws, but I think it is the best in the series. Okay, next in line from 1939 is Son of Frankenstein. This movie should be terrible. Henry Frankenstein isn't in it, only his son Wolf. The monster can no longer talk or emote as much. He's back to grunting and rambling. It doesn't really focus on horror as much as, like, the drama between the characters and the thrills. That said, this movie is awesome. It's not my favorite of the series, but it does do things better than any other movie, if that makes any sense. There are things that this movie does better than any of the other entries in the Frankenstein series. And the first thing I want to point out are the visuals. This movie is the best looking Universal monster movie, in my opinion, that I've seen. There could be a man-made monster might be really mind-blowing or something. I don't know. I haven't seen it. But Son of Frankenstein looks gorgeous. The rain, the stormy skies, the interior sets. When Frankenstein is on loose, the cinematography is just gorgeous. This was originally supposed to be shot in color, I think, but I'm glad they went with black and white because the contrast and the beautiful, clear film look, it's just gorgeous. I'm so glad I got to see this restored on Blu-ray. Another thing this movie does surprisingly well is characterization and writing. For a Universal monster movie, these characters are really fleshed out. I mean, Wolf Baron von Wolf Frankenstein is way more fleshed out than Henry Frankenstein ever was, which is very impressive. For a third entry in a series, it is very humanizing to its characters. And even the monster, who can't talk anymore, he can't emote as much, you still feel him, you know what I mean? You still feel that he's there, that his soul is there. Which was really surprising for me. It was my first time watching it all the way through. I'd seen clips from it, but it really hit me this time, how special this movie was. Igor, played by Bela Lugosi, fantastic. He's kind of sneaky. He's like the Gollum of this movie. He's kind of sneaky and conniving. He's got his own ideas about everything. He convinces Frankenstein's son, who is somewhat, it seems like he's a pretty nice guy and a family man. He convinces him to experiment and bring life to the monster, who I guess was struck by lightning, which doesn't really make any sense because wasn't the monster brought to life by being struck by lightning? But regardless, great setup. There's lots of thrills. I would say that the best aspect of this movie when it comes to the writing is the dynamic between Wolf and the inspector. You have the inspector who's kind of he's both a secondary antagonist in the fact that you don't want him to find out what Wolf is doing, but also he's technically the protagonist because Wolf at some point does become the antagonist of the movie. It's kind of a weird dynamic. You're rooting for both sides. But yeah, it's interesting dynamic. I love the characterization of the inspector, how he lost his arm, and I love how he interacts with the other people. He's smarter than he lets on, which is interesting. There are a couple scenes in this movie which kind of feel like a Hitchcock thriller. There's one part where Wolf's son, I guess the grandson of Frankenstein, the grandson, which would make him young Frankenstein, and young Frankenstein, I guess, he's Gene Wilder. But, and the inspector is questioning Wolf's son, and Wolf's son, I don't remember his name, curly-headed kid, is accidentally giving away information about Wolf and his experiments with Igor, and he's just kind of coercing him out of him. It reminds me of that part in The Simpsons where the private eye is investigating Ralph and trying to get information out of him. Same kind of thing. So there's some really good moments, some thrilling moments. It kind of does become a drama thriller. So it doesn't focus on the horror aspects as much, but they are there. There are some horror aspects to it as well. I mean, of course, it's a Frankenstein's monster. So you're going to get those classic Universal monster horror moments that you paid to see. As far as the negatives go, there are a few. First of all, this movie is long. It is very long. Compared to the others, Frankenstein was 71 minutes. Bride of Frankenstein was 75 minutes. And this one is 100 minutes long. It's pretty long compared to the others for a Universal monster movie. And there are parts that drag in the movie. I do think that there are parts that drag. But I think the high points of the movie more than make up for, how some parts are just for characterization. Also, the end of the movie is a little anticlimactic. I like the way that the Frankenstein's monster is pushed into a pit of sulfur, like Terminator, like T2. But then it kind of ends on a very fairy tale, storybook ending. They probably ran out of budget. I'd assume. But yeah, it's kind of a weird ending. I feel like they could have wrapped that up better. But those are my two negatives. I would give this movie a 9 out of 10. I think it is not as classic as Bride of Frankenstein, not as much of a horror movie. It doesn't succeed as much as a horror movie, but as a film in general, I think it's really good and even better than the first film. Okay, Ghost of Frankenstein from 1942. This is where the series took kind of a kind of a detour. Ghost of Frankenstein isn't very good. It's not bad. Okay, it's bad, but it's not bad. It's like good bad. This is the shortest of the series at a whopping 67 minutes in runtime. It's basically like one episode of Game of Thrones. And this feels less like a film and more like a film serial. It is really brief. It's like a synopsis of a movie. Essentially, the opening and conclusions of the movie are like 5 shots each. It's like it establishes the beginning, and then at the end, it's like, oh, and it's over. The middle drags in a couple places, but it always feels kind of like you're watching a B movie, and it is very entertaining. Essentially, in this one, it's all about Igor. Igor from Son of Frankenstein crosses back over into this one. And it's kind of the same plot of Son of Frankenstein, just done cheesier. Igor convinces another son of Frankenstein, there's another son now, who's a doctor, but he's like a good doctor, to perform experiments on Frankenstein's monster. So it's kind of the same thing as Son of Frankenstein, but, whatever. The climax of this movie is definitely when Bela Lugosi, as Igor, is in the Frankenstein's monster's body, speaking as Igor, and then he becomes blind for some reason. So then he's waving his arms around and speaking like Igor and knocking stuff over, and he sets the whole place on fire, and then the movie's over. Like, right there, it's over. Which is so funny. I told you, it's like a film serial. It's like, well, and then that happened. Lon Chaney Jr. kind of sucks as the monster. He doesn't look too bad. He looks kind of goofy and, like, rounded. He's, like, not fat, but, not as defined. You know what I mean? He's not as imposing. He's kind of, like, more like... he's Lon Chaney Jr., you know what I mean? He's not Boris Karloff. And when he starts speaking as Igor, it's pretty silly. It is pretty silly. That said, it's fun. It's a lot of fun. It's not on the same level of craftsmanship as the first 3 movies. I would liken it more in tone to like the Creature from the Black Lagoon trilogy. It's more like that as compared to like The Mummy or Frankenstein. It's less like a film and more like a movie. Yeah, so with all that said, I think that Ghost of Frankenstein isn't terrible. It's just more of a popcorn movie than the rest of them. And I don't think it needs to be high art, right? Not every movie needs to be high art, but it does have some serious flaws, lots of pacing issues. Writing is really... blah. And it kind of recycles the same plot as Son of Frankenstein, and Lon Chaney Jr. is the monster instead of Boris Karloff. And if he would have done a great job, then we wouldn't have a problem with that. But he was kind of bland. So I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10, and that's still a positive rating. But compared to the 9 out of 10, 9.25, whatever of the rest of them, it's kind of a step down in quality. I don't think it's the worst in the extended Universal Frankenstein franchise. As much as I love House of Dracula, there's some parts that are real bad in those movies, but I still love them, and I'll cover them at some point. I think at some point I'll do a Universal Monsters crossover video. House of Frankenstein, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, House of Dracula, and even the Abbott and Costello movies maybe. But this was just the first 4 movies, and now I'm going to rank each one of them just to let you know maybe the watch order if you haven't seen them in a while. I wouldn't recommend you watch them in this order if you've never seen them for the first time. Of course, start with the first one and work your way up. But if you haven't seen them in a while and you're looking for what do I spend a Saturday afternoon on, this is my ranking of them. So first is Bride of Frankenstein from 1935. 9.25 out of 10. I already talked about it. It's a classic. It's almost perfect. There are definitely parts that hold it down, but it's almost perfect. Yeah, it's a great movie. Next, I would put Son of Frankenstein I know, Son of Frankenstein over Frankenstein, heresy. But for the reasons I discussed, Son of Frankenstein is a really great movie. The writing is amazing. Already said that, but it's great. And Igor, as played by Bela Lugosi, fantastic. Love the shots, love the sets, love the music, love the writing. I'm putting that right underneath Bride of Frankenstein. And then you have Frankenstein from 1931. Great movie. This is the third best, not the third worst. It is very simple. The camera doesn't move a lot. Score is minimal, but that's understandable. It's from 1931. We're just coming off the sound era, or we're just coming into the sound era, off the silent era. So it makes sense as to why it's simple. Doesn't adapt that much from the original source material, but it didn't need to. It's Frankenstein, and it is a great movie. I still give it an 8.5 to a 9 out of 10. I just think that Son and Bride are just, they're really something. And then and then you have Ghost of Frankenstein. Ooh boy, I already talked about it. It does have some redeeming moments to it. There are parts where you're like, wow, I'm watching a Frankenstein movie. And then there are parts where you're like, wow, I'm watching a Frankenstein movie. You know what I mean? two very different sides to Frankenstein, but yeah. I love it. Ghost of Frankenstein. I love it for different reasons, but it's a 7 out of 10. It's definitely a step down in craftsmanship from the others, but it's still Frankenstein. You can't go wrong. I mean, it's not the same. It's not the same Frankenstein, nor is it the same Frankenstein's monster, but it bears the title Frankenstein. Therefore, you can't go wrong. And there was like I Frankenstein or whatever. That was pretty bad. Whatever. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I had to reshoot a couple parts of this video because my camera keeps turning off on its own. Not sure why it's doing that, but anyways, it's a labor of love, and I enjoy making these. Patrons, thank you so much. I make these for you. I'm making these videos for you, really, and then I release them to YouTube later just so more people can see them. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed me talking about Frankenstein. I'm looking forward to talking about more Frankenstein movies in the future. Maybe I'll do one on Dracula, maybe I'll do one on The Mummy, or maybe just other Universal or Universal acquired horror movies. I'd love to talk about Island of the Lost Soul, or The Island of Lost Souls, which is a Paramount picture, but Universal acquired it. I actually have that on VHS. Really good movie. Also starring Bela Lugosi. Well, starring he's in it for like 5 minutes of screen time. But, yeah. Good talking to you. Franksgiving. Alright. I've embarrassed myself enough.